My name is Jeff Eiden. I'm a senior product manager at Particle, and I was up there on stage talking about this product that you guys probably all saw, which is why you're in the seats that you're out today. And the goal of this workshop is to really take it one step further and dive into some of the things that I didn't necessarily have time to get into on stage. So the way that we're going to break this up is we're going to have a very, very short presentation style section of this workshop, and then we're going to do more of an interactive demo style where we're going to bring my colleague and trusted advisor, who I'll introduce in a moment, on stage, and he's going to really be the star of the show, and he's responsible for so much of all the documentation that was released on this new product today. So quickly, I wanted to put this up here first. As I mentioned in the keynote, the rules engine is in limited public beta. So what that means is when you go to our website, and here's the URL that you should go to, particle.io/IoT-rules-engine. When you get to that URL, you'll find the ability to request access, where you'll fill out a very brief form about who you are and what it is that you're doing, and then we'll be allowing people into the beta starting today and throughout the next few weeks. So I introduced myself. I also wanted to introduce Rick Casaguma. He's standing up and waving right now. His official title is that he's a technical documentation writer, but he's really so much more than that. It's hard to describe just how much he contributes to Particle. And if you've ever written into our support system via email, you've probably heard from Rick, and he's known for giving really great advice and helping you solve your problem in a really easy and understandable way. And he's been instrumental in helping paint the picture of how it is you can use this product for your own IoT use case. And frankly, that's one of the challenges here. We've built a very flexible system, but it's really difficult to really wrap your head around the different ways that you can use it, and Rick's really been helpful in that. Yes? Sure. Yes! Let's give it up! Thank you. That was great. I completely agree. It's funny, Rick was only part-time with us for a while, and we were trying for many years so hard to get him to become a full-time employee, and he finally agreed to it, and we're so happy to have him as a full-time team member now. So it's great. So as I discussed in the rules engine, I'll recap it really quickly. Our new product is called the Particle IoT Rules Engine, and the idea is to help get you to market faster through a drag-and-drop IoT application builder. And Zach previewed this in his keynote, but really what Particle has traditionally helped out with and focused on is bringing devices online and adding the connectivity piece to allow you to easily get data to the cloud and interact with those devices once that data reaches the cloud. But what happens to that information? Because at the end of the day, it is the information, the data coming from these devices, that is really the gold of IoT. And it's only when you can act on that data, glean insight from that data, analyze it, manipulate it, that your IoT product really becomes special. If you were at Larry's from Jacuzzi's presentation, that's really the meat and potatoes of what they do, is they get that data into their cloud, they analyze it, they store it in data warehouses, they interface it with Salesforce, and they're starting to also involve machine learning algorithms. So it's really about taking action on that data. And what the rules engine does is try to move you from the world of where you have to build all of that yourself to fundamentally simplifying that cloud-side middleware, all of these things that you see on the screen here. So as it had existed, you would need to spin up some sort of data ingestion surface area, which would then process the raw data coming from your devices. You would then apply certain business rules, the if-else statement kind of logic that we talked about earlier, interfacing with third parties, alerting and notifications, and so much more. And the idea is that the rules engine helps allow you to do more of this within the Particle ecosystem. So without further ado, you guys are here for a workshop, right? So let's get into the building. And I first wanted to start with exploring the. Can you guys see the nodes okay on the left here, or should I zoom in a little bit? Okay. I just learned about the Mac OS accessibility zoom, and I'm very excited about it. I used it on stage. I don't know if you noticed. So in the keynote, we talked about first the particle nodes, and I talked about publish, subscribe, variable, and function. How many of you all are familiar with what I mean when I say publish, subscribe, variable, and function? Okay, so about half to 3/4. But let's dive into that a little bit deeper. So the first two, publish and subscribe, these are part of the particle event system. So it's when devices have something to say to the cloud, whether it's a sensor piece of sensor data or what have you, it can easily send small messages to the cloud, but also it can subscribe to messages from the cloud or from other devices. So the particle publish node in the rules engine allows you to send a message from the rules engine that a device can subscribe to. The most common case to kick off a flow probably will be subscribe, which is essentially one of your devices is publishing some telemetry data, and you want to use that to kick off some conditional logic. And then the last two communication primitives are variable and function. So variables are essentially checking a value on a device in real time. So a device might keep a local version of a sensor reading or a piece of configuration data that you can use a cloud variable and reach out and say, hey, what's the value of that variable? And then lastly, we have function, which is tell a device to do something, right? You know, turn on the pump, open the door, turn on the light. And you saw that in the basement flood detector demo, which I'll dive into a little bit more, to turn on the sump pump. And the last one, which I didn't get to in the demo, but I'm really excited about, is this Particle API node. The Particle API node is essentially the catch-all. Over time, we're going to be adding more to the Particle palette here, but the Particle API allows you to make HTTP requests of any variety, get, put, post, what have you, so you can interact with all of the other endpoints and behaviors that our REST API offers. So for instance, Rick's going to be talking about using the rules engine to add some automation to firmware management, which is really cool. Or you could use it to interact with device groups. So it really makes it super powerful when you combine the rules engine with the ability to make REST API calls. Next, there's a category of the palette of nodes called the function, and this is basically manipulating a message that's flowing through the rules engine in some way, shape, or form. So I showed you the function node as part of the last keynote demo. This is the one that actually allows you to write the custom JavaScript to be able to really get that full-fledged control over what happens with a message as it passes through the rules engine. You could also make raw HTTP requests. There's nodes for handling CSV, HTML, JSON files. There's also a random number generator, something that can increment a value. There's tons of options here to really pick what nodes are useful to you. There's inputs and outputs. But the ones that I really want to highlight, we pulled in some nodes that focus on better integrations with third parties. And one of the common requests that we get all the time at Particle is, how can I store my data? Do you store my data for me? Do you offer database services? So the rules engine actually makes a big leap in that direction. I didn't have time to get to this in the keynote. But there's a category of storage nodes. And you can actually provide database credentials to pipe data directly into a database that you've spun up to store IoT data, which is really powerful. And to just reiterate, this is all something that would have had to be done outside of Particle through sending a webhook, receiving it in some system that you've spun up, and then connecting to a database. So it really lowers the barrier to a lot of these things. We also have integrations with popular third-party tools. I demonstrated Twilio. You can really easily send SMS-based notifications when interesting things happen. But we also have the usual suspects of cloud services, right? So we make it really easy to interact with AWS, which is super cool. We have Azure nodes. We also have nodes from IBM Watson IoT, Google Cloud PubSub, and we also have easy ways into Salesforce. So there's a lot here, and I really encourage you all to explore the full scope of what you can do with the rules engine. And lastly, there also is a data visualization component to the rules engine, which is really cool. You can drag these dashboard nodes onto your flow. And I quickly just wanted to show something. We have a group of our most engaged Particle users and developers that are called the Elite, and we released this a little bit early to them yesterday. This like hasn't even been 24 hours. And a guy named Garrett from our community posted this. Wow, it's a little off center here. But yeah, you can see it better there. He already created this dashboard. He has all of these temperature and humidity sensors placed around his house, and he wired this up within minutes in the rules engine. So it's really quite powerful. So with that, I'd like to call Rick up on stage, and he spent a ton of time, as I mentioned, building a lot of technical content and creating use case specific flows that help give better senses of what it is you can do with the rules engine. And you can find all of these on our documentation. There's a new section in our tutorials called IoT Rules Engine, and he's going to walk through some of those today. So please give a warm welcome to Rick Casaguma.
Thank you. And we are going to start out with the dashboard. So what I did is I built a small board here. It has a temperature sensor on it. It has a photon. Someday this will be mesh-based. But for today, we'll just do temperature. I set up this flow. I'm having trouble using your laptop, Jeff. What is it doing? Wait. Do you have scroll not set? Why is it scrolling for you and not for me? I have no idea. See? Oh, okay, now it's working. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, I see what happened now. So we start with the subscribe node, which we used in a lot of the other demos. This allows you to subscribe to events sent from your devices. But in this example, we're actually using it with a Particle product. And one of the neat things about that is it's scalable. I mean, it's scalable to really large sizes. We're only doing it with 3 nodes today. But it is fully compatible with Particle products as well. The next thing we're going to do is update a table. And so this shows the power of being able to embed any JavaScript you want in your flow. It'll be deployed to our cloud and run in your rules engine instance safely. And it allows you to do more advanced processing than you would normally be able to do just with a drag and drop user interface. And these are easily shareable. So we envision in the community forums or in some other place, you'd be able to share these little snippets of code that were really useful to you, and you'll be able to learn from others. And that's one of the great advantages, because you can just drop them in your flow. You can pick up a little bit more JavaScript as you go, learn more and more, and eventually become an expert in this. But the barrier to entry is much lower because you start by dragging and dropping. And then what we do, this allows us to create a custom table that expands with every device we add to it. So when we start out, we'll only have one device in our table. Let's go ahead and deploy this flow. And go into the dashboard. This was from before. Throw in another one. Oh, there it is. It came online. Let's see. Let's throw a third one. plug this one in up here so that we can see that blinking cyan. In a second, there's the third one came online. And if I hold down my finger on the temperature sensor, you can see that number 4 is rising rapidly for my body heat. It is live, and that's how that part works. But you'll notice there's a third column, RSSI, in there, and that's there because I've gone and added some more things to it. This diagnostics update is a Particle API node. That's what Jeff was talking about that allows you to incorporate any Particle API call. And what I did is, oh, actually, this is a subscribe node. What I'm doing here is subscribing to the diagnostic update that all Particle devices send when they connect to the cloud and periodically. So by monitoring this, we can use the JavaScript, custom JavaScript, to pick out the pieces of the diagnostic data that we're interested in our little table, and then pass it off into the table node. And that's how that gets formatted. There's some other things that we do along the line here. You can have periodic tasks. This is at startup, and every 4 hours, this task is run automatically. You can schedule any task you want. It can start a flow flowing. It could then execute any JavaScript that you'd like. In this case, what we're doing is every 4 hours, we then use the Particle API node to list all my product device names. And this is because when they come from the cloud, we only have the device ID, the 24-character hex. But that's not very nice in the table. It's hard to read. It's hard to remember which one is which. So what we do is query the product device list every 4 hours, and then we save the device names. And one of the things about this is you can see that there's a flow.set command. It's not a database, but it does allow you to share data between nodes within your flow. And that's what it does here. It allows, so when the table is updated in response to a temperature event, it can see that data that was stashed aside in this node in order to provide the device names in our table instead of the device IDs. And then that's what it looks like. So you can see that it's able to mix in data that we received by events directly from the device whenever the value changes, my temperature value changes. We're able to get device names out of the cloud automatically, and we're able to mix in the diagnostic data all using the rules engine. So that's my first thing. Are there any questions about this flow? Sure. Can you wildcard your subscribe? Can you wildcard your subscribe? That is a good question. All Particle subscribes are prefix-based. So if you create an event looking for A, it picks up any event that begins with the letter A, which is not a particularly useful example, but it allows you to group your events together in a way that allows you to filter them. So it's not as powerful as, say, a regular expression or anything like that, but by carefully choosing your prefixes when you name your events, you can divide them out so that they're more easily processed. Now, this only affects really the amount of data flowing from the cloud to your rules engine instance. You could, can you get all events? Yes. You can get all events in your event stream sent into the rules engine by subscribing with no prefix at all, and then you can filter them down using things like the switch node or doing it directly in JavaScript. So the switch node allows you to do if-then. Actually, let me just bring that up. Oh yeah, it's in that. Just missed it. There it is. So the switch node allows you to do various tests. So for instance, you can do an equals, less than, you can do, well, pretty much any basic test without needing to write code. So in mine, because I'm kind of more of a programmer, I did it all in JavaScript. But that's not the way that you have to do it. It's an option available to you, but then you can also do it all by dragging and dropping and selecting the various things like equals or not equals. And one of the things, the switch node, it won't let me do it until I fill it. Anyway, we'll get into more into that node in the next example. Any more questions? Okay, so that was a fairly basic example and a pretty common example of how a lot of people are going to be using the rules engine. But it can do a lot more than that. We're going to do an unusual example in this case because it shows some advanced features that you might not think would be suitable for use in the rules engine. Is it? Oh, it is. No one-tap click. It's screwing me up. Okay, so what this does is a dynamic firmware management. So imagine you have this device, and the user wants to be able to do firmware updates from the cloud, as is common in Particle products. But for whatever reason, maybe it would be too disruptive to just randomly push the software to the device. You want to have it under user control. So they can press a button, and if an update is available, the LED will light, and then when they press the button, they'll get their software update. This is actually fully implementable in the rules engine, which I found to be pretty cool. So we start out by using the inject node. So what we want to do is every couple minutes, we will make a Particle API call to get all of the firmware in my product, all the firmware versions in my product. So when a new version is released, this will update this data. And we, again, store that in a safe place using the flow set, which sets a variable available to other nodes within our flow. And then we do two more things. The device will send a check firmware update event periodically. And that's when the device is asking the cloud, do you have a firmware update available? And this event is received by this node in the flow. And then I've written some JavaScript that compares the value we received earlier for the latest firmware version to the firmware version that the device asked for. And if it's the same, if there is no version available, the flow just ends there. That's the return null. That means the rest of the flow won't be executed, and that's it. Then the last thing we do, though, is if there is a firmware update, we'll use the particle function node to call that device and tell it, yes, you have an update. And that's what we'll do here. So my device is starting up. It's blinking green. It's blinking cyan. It's sent a check firmware event, and my light is on now. And that means that it actually went through the check firmware event, compared the versions, found there's a newer version, and it executed the notify new version. Now, when I press that button, it's going to publish another event, the update firmware event. And this is, again, a subscribe node. When the update firmware event is received, it will be processed. And in this case, we're preparing a lock and flash request in the Particle API. This allows the cloud to, this allows you to select a specific firmware version to use on a specific device and then automatically flash it immediately. So we can see that if I press the button, it goes through blinking cyan, blinking, and it actually got its firmware update, or is getting it. It's almost back online. Update complete. And you can see in the debug section over on the side, the check firmware, the update firmware, and you can see it got another check firmware because that's it's checking to see if the new if there's an even newer version, and of course there isn't, so that's why the flow ends right there. So any questions? Yes?
So this is for your own firmware, like your own software. What about like going from 070 to 080?
Okay, so the question is, this is for my own firmware, and the question is, how about upgrading system firmware, device OS? And the answer is, you could do that in the rules engine. Now, normally, most people don't manually roll out firmware. They roll out a new version of their user firmware, which requires an update, and the device will update itself automatically. And that's the preferred way of doing it. But there are use cases where you might want to manually roll out a system firmware version. And now you can do that using curl or Node.js to run a script, essentially. But it's a little bit of a pain to do that script because it has to wait until the device comes back online, and then you send it another part, and then it has to come back online. But that's actually an ideal application for the rules engine because it can monitor the events for the device coming online. It can easily make a Particle API request to send a specific file, the system firmware part, 1, 2, or 3, depending on whether, or 2 or 3, depending on whether it's a photon or it's an electron. And so that actually would be an ideal application for the rules engine. Questions? Yes? So the question is, is there a type-safe compiled language version of this? No, there isn't. The rules engine is Node.js all the way down. It's yeah, there's no way around that. Yes. The question is there any difference between using this and Node-RED? No, yes and no. The main advantage, there's two advantages. One is it's particle hosted, so you don't have to worry about a hosting provider for your node instance. And the Particle API nodes are included in this. They're not available for installation in the general Node-RED at this time. So yes, you could implement this whole thing by yourself, like a lot of things. You could implement it yourself, but this is a much easier way because it's already been done for you. Yes?
How well does the subscribe scale?
How well does a subscribe scale? Well, we think pretty high. The thing is, the subscription model is definitely scalable. The limitation will be the amount of RAM and processing power available in your instance. And we haven't determined the actual numbers. And we can actually scale the instance sizes. And those are details that we're working on right now. We expect the subscribe itself to be very reliable, though, because this is based on the same foundation that we use internally, within all the Particle cloud. So that stream should be reliable. It's not going to be a situation where events just randomly disappear. We expect that to be reliable. The only question is how big it will scale on the size of the instance that we're using for the rules engine right now. Yes, in the back. Yep. No additional cost. Jeff, would you like to address?
Great question. So right now, the rules engine is in beta, and for those of you who apply for early access, there won't be an additional cost for the beta instance of the rules engine. Now, that being said, we're not going to spin up a massive M4 large AWS box for everyone who applies to the beta. So, if you are trying to use this in production, that's something that you want to reach out and talk to us about. We haven't determined the final pricing for this yet. We will when the product becomes generally available. But I can tell you that much like any of our tools that you've come to know and love in Particle, we don't generally like to say you only use this if you pay. We like to offer some free version of any one of our tools, and if you're using it for more professional scaled use cases, then that becomes a value-added service at that time. So I hope that answers the question. Correct. At the higher levels of service, and again, we're still working through some of these details to support customers at large scale. This would fall under the SLA, much like any other of the services in the Particle Cloud today. Yes. That was not our intent. The idea was that we'd make this really easy for our customers by just making it another part of the Particle ecosystem. When we do, so the beta version right now, if you notice, is hosted at a different Particle subdomain, and when you would apply, you'd get your very own subdomain. But we want to continue to make this more of a fully integrated experience, and you don't really see where the rules engine begins and ends and the console begins and ends. So we are working to pull this into our console as a first-class citizen. So it's going to feel a lot like the experience of using the web IDE, for instance. And we feel Rick alluded to this. One of the main value propositions of using the Particle Rules Engine as opposed to Node-RED is that we handle the hosted nature of the product for you. So no matter how many devices you have, no matter what kind of event volume you're working with, it's not something you really have to worry about.
No plans to allow you to run it in your own VPC then?
Not currently, but of course we're open to feedback, and we can have more of those discussions to talk about how that might make sense. Let's see. I think we have a little under 10. Oh, one more question.
Yeah. What is the timeline for going public with it, beta?
We're planning on IPOing. No, I'm just kidding. Early 2019 is when we plan to make this generally available. But you can get, as I said, apply and for everyone at Spectra today, it is my gift to tell you that you'll all get access to the beta within the next week or two for being at this workshop, because we love you. Yes, in the back. Yes. Bingo. That's the one of the main value propositions of using the tool. So if you did notice, there was a MySQL node here if you want to plug directly into a database, but that could just be one part of your flow. You could route the message into MySQL and use that to send an SMS-based notification, or send it into Azure. And if you wanted to handle that inside of Azure, you could do so. So the point is it's supposed to be flexible. Sir. Twisted question. I'm nervous now. Okay. Yes. Oh. That's interesting. Rick, do you have an answer for that?
No. No, actually I don't. But I suspect the issue is mainly going to be that until you get connected, you won't be able to communicate with the rules engine. So I'm going to go with that. But I'm not 100% confident in that answer.
Yeah, that's a good call out. So yeah, the rules engine is something hosted in the cloud. We are throwing around, as the Node-RED team is already doing, they're running Node-RED not just in the cloud, but also on physical devices like Raspberry Pi. and letting you into some of my future musings, I think it would be really interesting to start to expose some of this functionality to run on Particle devices and really create kind of a mirror image where both for programming logic on the devices and in the cloud, you have a nice visual interface like this, or you can see under the hood and write code and have that kind of experience. Yes?
What happens to the flow if you have a failure?
That's a really good question. Most failures show up automatically in the debug log. There is also in the, I believe in the, yes, the input node, there's a special node called catch, and that allows you to basically route your errors and even add logic on top of the errors that come up. So it's essentially like catching errors as you would in normal programming. Yes. Yes, so one of the system events that a device sends when the cloud loses the ability to reach it is, it's offline. So you could use the subscribe node to say, okay, tell me when a device comes offline, and perhaps we mark that in a certain group, or we create an alert based on that. And I think Rick has even more to say about it.
I do. Actually, one of the tutorials, if you look at the tutorials on the docs website, is a special case where it is a rule that comes into play when a device stops sending events. So you can imagine this could be used by putting it into a device group. This would be suspect devices, for instance. So like you're using device groups in your product, and we have a suspect, or inspect, I think is what I used, a device group for inspect. And those are devices you should go and investigate, because there's something wrong with them, they're not sending events. So this is definitely one of the applications that's ideal for the rules engine.
I just quickly, before we end here, I wanted to point out, Rick mentioned this documentation, and when you pull up the docs, if you click on tutorials, there's this new section for IoT Rules Engine. And let me show you the landing page, because it really breaks it down quite nicely. What we've done is we've come up with 6 buckets of use cases: real-time alerting, device commands, data management, visualization and analytics, remote diagnostics, and OTA firmware automation. Now, this obviously isn't everything that you can do with the rules engine, but these are places to get you started and give you some inspiration as you start to use the product. And each one of these links to might I say, a beautiful tutorial that Rick has written for each one of these use cases. And even he takes you through everything, the hardware that you need, how to wire it together, how to deal with the authentication piece of the rules engine, and how you go about actually creating the flows. So it's really quite extensive, and Rick's been working on this for the last couple of months. So this is another great resource for you if you're just trying to get your feet wet and understand how things work. And at the beginning, there's like a quick start guide that helps. You all are experts at this point, so you'll know all of this. But defining key terms like nodes and flows, talking about the palette, how you get started, how you start building your first flow. So there's a lot here to get you started. So I think we are at time now, and I know there's another exciting workshop following this. So I'd like to thank Rick, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here today. I hope that was helpful. If there's other questions that we didn't have time to get to, feel free to find one of us later in the day today. So thank you very much.